Kind of the start of hockey season, but I mean, whatever, it's August, so I'm still swimming in my pool, but it is what it is. So thank you all for coming on. They'll appreciate it. And yeah, so playoffs kind of wrapped up a little bit ago. We had the draft, we had free agency. We got a lot to get to because there were a lot of trades too that happened recently. So I personally don't want to waste any time. And I want to introduce everybody that we have on here today. So I'll kind of just go across and down and all that fun stuff. So we'll start with Drew from one of our Boston Bruins podcasts. We just added a second one. But Drew, how are things?
Things are okay. Bergeron retired, if you didn't hear.
I didn't hear. I had no idea. Nice. We got Drew.
Otherwise good.
Beautiful. I'll kind of just roll across. So we got Michael from our Canadian Connection guys. We got David and Kirby from our Florida podcast down below. We got Peter from our Sticks in the Six, and also Joe from our Rink Rat Report for our Toronto Maple Leafs podcast. We got Matt from the Ottawa Senators, and we got Tony from our Buffalo Sabres podcast. And I'm just making sure we're bringing Kirby back in. There we go. So yeah, I guess we can kind of get going here. I don't want to waste anybody's time, but Tony, I wanted to start with you, mainly because you have to go somewhere. So I figured we can kind of just get the ball rolling here. Maybe I have the little graphic here too to show, as everyone can kind of see nicely if it shows. I went through a lot of work with this, so I hope you guys can appreciate what I have here and our little screens that you can kind of see right now. But yeah, so let's kind of get started here. Let's talk a little bit about the Atlantic Division. So we have Buffalo up first, and obviously we saw what happened last year with them, where it was a good young core and maybe a little bit of expectations towards them as they were trying to make the playoffs. They got actually fairly close if you do look at the standings at the end of the day. And one of the teams that were fairly quiet too, as the offseason kind of went on as well. So adding guys like Connor Clifton, you see here with Eric Johnson, Cal Clegg, Dustin Tarkowski, and as they lost Vinny Hinostroza and Malcolm Subban, who amazingly is still in the league. So I'll kind of let Tony start us off here. It's just going to be a nice group chat, nice little chillax evening that we have. Tony, what are your thoughts or expectations going into training camp as the season starts for Buffalo? Who needs to step up? Who needs to kind of fill these shoes as these young guys are kind of getting older into this new season?
Yeah, as you mentioned, not a lot of additions this offseason. I know the fans were kind of hoping for a big splash or something, but there's a lot of faith in the guys we have on the team. Obviously, Tage Thompson has kind of came out of nowhere the past 2 seasons, and so they're painting him as the number 1 center. And then you got Dylan Cousins, who's coming in again after a great year, hoping he can take that step. And then guys like Casey Middlestat are ones to keep an eye on. He could take that third center role. He can play top 6 minutes, and he's got a lot of potential still that's untapped. So the whole team's just so young, so it can go either direction, really.
Do you have a sense of who can start or be the number 1, whether you are looking at Devin Levi or whether it be like if Ukko Pekka-Luukkonen can have a really good training camp and maybe he kind of steps in, or does even, does another guy happen to surprise you even to kind of grab that number 1 spot?
It's Devin Levi all the way.
Yeah.
For me, at least. I know a lot of people have different opinions, but he is like 21 years old. Like, that's insane. He has an entire almost franchise on his back, but not really. It's not that much, but very high expectations for him. But the way I see it, dude's so different compared to any other goalie that I've seen in the past, decade since I've even paid attention. I'm still young, but I don't know. He's just different, and I have so much trust in him that I say give him 50 games this year. See what happens. And if he can't handle it with the exhaustion that's going to come with that, he's been playing in college. So, but I can see the flaws happening too, but it's just growing pains. So,
gotcha. So adding people into this conversation here a little bit, I wanted to ask, as to be fair, it is a tough division. I'd like to argue that specifically for the Atlantic, it probably is going to be one of the tougher divisions that you're going to see this year. Is there a team that kind of worries you to think, man, if we have to win game 82 and we go up against said team, who's that team you're kind of looking at saying, man, they give us a little bit of a worrisome here?
I'm going to go Ottawa. I think they took some big moves. They if they stay healthy, they're a solid team. I know a lot of people don't want to admit that around Buffalo, but they're very. I can see the future with Ottawa, but I think if Levi can put up a like Calder finalist season almost, and I think that we'll take that step first before they do.
Cool. I want to open the floor to everybody else. If everybody, I just kind of want to get everybody's thoughts on Buffalo too. Again, they had a quiet offseason. Not a lot of stuff happened, but again, like Tony just mentioned, there are guys like Dylan Cousins getting another year of experience, right? With Devin Levi possibly playing 50 games this year. Kind of want to open the floor to everybody to think, what do you expect of the Buffalo Sabres going into this season?
Yeah, and maybe I'll jump in first just because you mentioned Ottawa. Ottawa and Buffalo are two of the youngest teams, two of the youngest three, I believe, in the league. So that's definitely going to be a battle to watch. But yeah, I think it's hard not to like what Buffalo's building. They're building out of the draft. They still have a great pipeline. I think for them, it'll really come down to can any of their young goalies step up. They relied on Craig Anderson, and I love Craig Anderson as a Sens fan, but he's obviously not in the league anymore. He's getting older, so I think Buffalo's biggest thing is going to be can the rest of the team help to, I don't know if shelter's the right word, but really back up their goaltenders and make sure that they're lowering those high danger chances against, and yeah, I think that's going to be the main thing to watch for Buffalo.
My early season predictions, I have Ottawa and Buffalo both in the playoffs right now. So,
really?
And I think one of them could start really hot and sit in like a top 3 spot for the first month or two. Just with Toronto, Tampa, Florida, and Boston, either starting slow because of expectations from last year, injuries this year. I think if one of Ottawa or Buffalo can get off on the right foot.
Right.
And like mentioned, I think the key is the net with Buffalo. I think, to me, they're one addition away. People can disagree with that, but I think like a Hellebuck, a Gibson, something like that to mentor Levi. David and I are pretty familiar with Devin Levi. I watched him a lot in World Juniors. I think it's a lot to put on his shoulders behind a young defense. So I think they're one piece away, and Ottawa thinks they're kind of there now. Maybe fans thought they were there last year. I kind of had them at 92 points last year. I think maybe they finished with that if Anton Forsberg and Josh Norris were healthy. So, again, I think the division comes back down to earth a bit at the top, but it's going to be an ultra-competitive division around that third spot in the wild card positions.
Cool. Anybody else want to chime in at all with Buffalo?
Yeah, if I can chime in a little bit about Devin Levi.
Yeah.
I love the goaltender. I think he's going to be great. He has very little pro experience, so I'm not sure that it's right to have the expectation of him playing 50 games this season.
Right.
I mean, how often does it happen where a goalie goes straight from NCAA to NHL full-time goaltender like that? So
yeah,
that's the only part that worries me. I do think they're going to have to look at the waiver wire for a goaltender in preseason.
And I was just going to quickly say, just before you guys move on, with Kirby mentioning kind of adding that missing piece and having Neil just joining us too on the stream, or in the comments section asking about Patrick Kane, and those rumors have been kind of swirling. Tony, what's the idea for you, real quick, just about Patrick Kane and the possibility that he could come back to his hometown?
It's gonna happen eventually. It's like, I mean, I don't really care for it. No offense to Kane, but it feels like it'll be cool. Why not?
Yeah, it would suit well.
Yeah, I mean, there's rumors here and there, whatever. If he comes here to not be like if he doesn't come in expecting to be a superstar, then it's fine, because he probably will be getting third line minutes just with the amount of trust Granato has in the guys in the top 6 right now. So
gotcha.
I don't know if it happens, cool, but
if not, not a big deal.
Any assets? I know he's a free agent, but definitely don't want to trade for him.
Gotcha. I want to bring in my Leafs guys here, and I want to know again the ratio of what it's going to be when Toronto ends up going to Buffalo again, whether it be like 90% of them being all Leafs fans because they're all from St. Catharines and all that. I want to bring Peter and Joe in just to kind of chime in, just to see, because you guys obviously have a good rivalry between you guys and Buffalo, and if it goes all the way back to the Winter Classic that recently happened with both those teams, right? I mean, not recent, but you know what I mean. I just wanted to hear your guys' thoughts on Buffalo this season.
Yeah, I think that Buffalo, if there's going to be one team that can sneak in, it's definitely going to be them. But like we've already brought up, the big question mark is going to be goaltending with Levi. Is he going to be able to handle the pressure? Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, is he going to be able to take the reins over Craig Anderson? And thank God Craig Anderson is out of the league, because every single time he plays against the Leafs, it's always a masterclass. So, I mean, happy retire. I mean, all the best for him, but glad to see maybe somebody else can step up and probably take over his role and be the thorn in the Maple Leaf sides. But yeah, I think that you brought up a good point, Kyle. They're probably gonna have to look to the waiver wire too. And the Maple Leafs did sign Martin Jones. And Michael, sorry, you brought it up. Sorry, I'm losing track a bit there. But yeah, the Maple Leafs did sign Martin Jones. I don't think that he's going to be a long-term fix on the Maple Leafs, goaltending duo, because you're already looking at Ilya Samsonov and Joseph Wall. So if he hits the wire at just under $1 million, there's a possibility that maybe he could be an option, because he's trying to look to bounce back himself. So
is he better than Eric Comrie though? I don't think so.
Ooh, yeah.
I'm higher on Eric Comrie than most, probably. I think he got hosed in some games last year where just the team didn't play very well in front of him. I still think he's a decent goaltender. Do I think he's a starter on a contending team? No, but I think he's a solid goaltender. And by the end of this year, if Buffalo shores up defensively a little bit, that he'll be of good value and probably get a pay raise. I mean, he's only 28 or so. I mean, I heard the comment, they need someone like Hellebuyck to come in. I think they need to shore up their defense a lot more before they bring Hellebuyck in. I mean, Kevin Woodley from In Goal Magazine mentioned this. Hellebuck's weakness is cross-ice plays. He's not the fleetest of foot. If you give him one-on-one battles, then he's money all day, as we've seen with the Winnipeg Jets. If you put him in Buffalo's system, though, he's not a Vezina candidate, I don't think. I mean, who really would be? So you need Tage Thompson, you need Dylan Cousins. I would say you need Jeff Skinner, but he's 30 years old. This guy's not learning to play defense anytime soon. You need those guys and Owen Power and all of your younger guys to really shore up defensively before you're able to make some moves. But yeah, I do like Buffalo. I think they will definitely. I think the entire Atlantic is going to be a lot more competitive than previous years.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Wanted to give Drew or David a chance too to kind of chime in. I didn't know if you guys wanted to say anything about your best friends in Buffalo.
In terms of expectations, I never expect anything from Buffalo in terms of that. Sometimes they just are a huge threat suddenly. Sometimes I don't even really notice them. So I know they're the wild card, and it's looking like this year maybe the playoffs. But I will mention on Connor Clifton, the former Bruin. I went to Quinnipiac University with him, so I got to kind of see his career unfold from there, and then signed by the Bruins. On Brews and Bruins, I argue pretty much every week that he should be a Norris candidate. No, he's one of those guys that's just a depth defenseman right now, or at least he was with Boston. He's kind of trying to make that leap to solidify a role. Maybe that's even in the top 4 at some point on defense. So it's an interesting point in his career going to Buffalo and see if he can nail down a role with the team and just, be there all 82 games.
Gotcha. David, I don't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, just real quick. I know on our podcast, we kind of had our stocks going up and down. And one of the players we mentioned was Dylan Cousins for one of my co-hosts. So we're really high on Dylan Cousins, thinks he's going to have a good year. And a little bit more on Levi. I know Luongo kind of stole that pick really late in the draft when we drafted him. So the organization with the Panthers were really high on Levi and making that trade with Reinhart a few years back. We knew Levi was eventually going to turn into be a decent prospect for you guys. So, we're hoping the best for him, but not against the Panthers, I
guess. Awesome. Well, Tony, I'll kind of give you the last word here. I know you got to go soon, but just kind of talk to us just about obviously like your expectations, obviously again for Buffalo and for your show too coming up for the season. I know it's gonna be a big year and an important year obviously for Buffalo, right? So I want to let you have kind of the last word on it before you head off.
Yeah. So for expectation, I don't want to say playoffs. I want to say improve. I would just have more points because at the end of the day, Ottawa, Detroit, those guys could have more points than us, but we could still be almost a 100-point team. And if that's the case, that's fine. Just improvement all around, stay healthy. I know that the depth has gotten a little better, but we've also lost some guys too. Right. And then to Connor Clifton, I think something that's interesting is people call it a Granato guy. He played at NTDP under Don Granato, so that's also another reason they got Greenway last season. But I can see Clifton getting surprisingly top pair minutes with Dahlin, because I can picture this season Owen Power playing with Samuelson a lot, just because they didn't really get that defensive presence that everyone was kind of expecting, like in a Brett Pesce or something. So I can see Dahlin and Clifton being like a top pair, and it's just heavily carried by Dahlin. And if it comes to it, he'll get bailed out maybe by Clifton. We'll see. And we'll see how he goes under Granato's system.
Cool. And you got a little bit of a tire pump too for your logo from Neil. So there you go. Yeah, I'll let you go, Tony, though. I know you got plans, so appreciate you coming on. And yeah, hopefully we'll talk to you soon this season. And go check out the Go Aheads podcast, guys, if you can. So, Tony, thank you for coming on. I know it was short notice, but we appreciate you having on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I'll see you again soon.
Awesome. See you, Tony. Okay, who wants to go next? I have one up, but who wants to go next? If anybody wants to, I can. The reason why I was going to start with this next team is because we don't actually have one on currently for this next team. I don't know if you guys can see already, so maybe we'll start with that if that's cool. Not like you guys have a lot of say, because I'm just going to fucking do it. So it's the Tampa Bay Lightning. Let's just do it.
Oh, this is the one I signed up for.
Oh, true. That's
I
right.
was ready for this one.
Okay, you know what? In that case, then maybe we'll start with Joe, because I forgot you did sign up for that one. So, to recap, they finished sixth in the East, but they finished third place, obviously facing against Toronto in the first round. We all know what happened there. Bit of an interesting offseason in the sense that I'm not sure, in my opinion, that the Lightning did technically a better losing. As you can see, they're losing guys like Alex Killorn. To me, losing Ross Colton, I thought was a big one there. Maroon, Perry, Bellemare, Cole, the list goes on there. So, and then you just kind of compare it to, some of the guys that they added. I don't know if that's going to kind of help them as this season comes to fruition. And then you see the record too. I mean, they only had 6 overtime losses. So, going 46-30, considering what we've seen from Tampa, especially for the past couple of years, I'm curious really to see, because we've talked about recently about how good this division is going to be, is can Tampa continue being part of that top 3 conversation? So, having said that, I will leave it out to Joe because he did sign up for this one. So, give me your thoughts initially on the Lightning draft off, because they didn't have a first round pick. They're off season entirely with the free agency and the trades that they made. I'll let you have the floor.
I probably wouldn't have signed up for this one if the Leafs didn't beat them. I feel like it's kind of like the meme. I showed up to my biggest hater's funeral, that guy, just to make sure that he was dead.
Right.
So, and I'm taking glee in the fact that they did not get better this offseason. I mean, who did they add? Their biggest addition was Connor Sheary. I mean, they are hoping that Tanner Jeannot files into form. I guess that's probably not a word, but like they spent all those picks on him at the deadline. He did get hurt, and he was scratched for Michael Eisman in the playoffs. So you're really hoping that, he kind of fills back into that 20-goal spot. But when you look at it, at the end of the day, they lost. Their biggest loss was Alex Killorn. He was third on the team, tied with Steven Stamkos with 41 5-on-5 points, I believe it was.
I think so.
19 5-on-5 goals. And coming back in was only Connor Sheary. So you lost a lot. You have another year on the tread, I suppose you could say, of Stamkos and Victor Hedman, who dropped from 85 points to 49 last year. And on top of that now, I mean, Vasilevsky has made it clear, like, I'm playing too many games. I would like a little bit of rest going into the playoffs. And their backup goalie is Jonas Johansson, who I can't remember the beat writer for Buffalo, but he said he was the worst goalie he's ever seen. I will give Jonas Johansson a little bit of credit. He did have a good AHL season last year. He's big. I believe he can move decently. But from what I've seen, he doesn't get square to shots at all, and he doesn't get his feet set. So it'll be an interesting preseason for him, because if he's no good, they're going to toss him right into the garbage, and they're going to go waiver wire hunting, whether that's Magnus Hellberg, Martin Jones, but I don't know how much confidence Martin Jones or Magnus Hellberg really instills in you. So,
yeah.
Anyways, at the end of the day, though, when you look at all these, you can't just look at these subtractions to the team. You do have to look at, they still have Kucherov. He's a hell of a player. They still have Braden Point. He's a hell of a player. They still have Steven Stamkos. They still have all this elite talent. Mikhail Sergachev, Eric Cernak's a fantastic shutdown defenseman. They have one of the top 3 goalies in the world, arguably the best goalie in the world in Andrei Vasilevsky, right? They still have all this elite talent. The bottom half is kind of depleted out, though, I would say. Not depleted, but it's not as good as years past. You don't have the Gaudreau, Coleman, and Gaudreau, Coleman and Buddy on Seattle, small guy.
Yanni Gord.
Yanni Gord. Yeah.
There we are. Everything but his name, huh? Anyway, I still think they will compete for the top of the division.
Okay.
And it does. You can't look over the fact Cirelli only played 50 games last year. He missed a good chunk of the first half of the season. He didn't have an off season.
Right.
I mean, none of the team had much of an off season for the past 2 years. Now you finally get your first full off season. You're going into the season with everyone healthy. But then again, you also have to look at everyone else in the Atlantic is better, right?
Right.
Like, everyone that missed the playoffs got better. So,
true. And I mean, this really is the question, I think, going into the season. I think a lot of people are going to look at is this going to be the year that they just happen to slip out? So I wanted to move to our Florida guys here in David and Kirby, though, because obviously it's a lovely relationship that you guys have with them. But, I mean, with Florida on their run last year, but kind of thinking of just this regular season, like, does this really feel like it's going to give you guys confidence just seeing the offseason moves that they made to say, hey, like, we can overlap these guys going into next season? Like, what are your thoughts on Tampa?
Yeah, I'll go first, Kirby, if you don't mind. I mean, we thought last year with our President's Trophy season and going into the playoffs that we were destined to be the team to come out of the East. But, of course, Tampa stood in our way. And who was at the front? Vasilevsky. So I think as long as Vasilevsky's there, you mentioned Kucherov, Joe, you mentioned Stamkos, those guys that have been there, done that, they're not going to quit. It's not a team that's going to, we've been in the short end of the stick last year, our run is done. I don't think they have that mentality per se. So,
Gotcha.
I still think Tampa, to me, is still a top 3 team in the Atlantic. They're like a team that you mentioned, Joe, that kind of cap constraint, like the majority of the top teams in the Atlantic and in the Metro. So just one of those teams that, with the cap not moving, they weren't really able to do much. So I still expect Tampa to hang around. I don't think they're going anywhere soon.
David, did I hear JoJo's name? That must have been buried in the summer. I didn't hear that sign. He was not too good for us. So I'm glad he's going to be wearing
maybe Michael at Montreal remembers Johansson when they beat us 10-3 or something.
He hasn't been good for a while. So minor league numbers aside, that's nice to see that he's
never been good.
We have enough problems with Vasilevsky as is.
Yeah.
Vasilevsky, Point, and Hedman, I say to our fan base often, we host Twitter Spaces nightly, and I say as a host, all respect to those 3. I don't have respect for some of the other players on the team, but those 3 guys, as long as they're going, they're motoring. Those guys are on the younger side too. Stamkos getting a little bit older. Kucherov misses a lot of times with injury, but if Hedman gets a little bit of rest here, Point as well. Remember, the Tampa Bay Lightning beat the Panthers without Point. He went down in that series against Toronto 2 years ago in that Game 7, and they still swept us in 4. So again, and if Vasilevsky gets a little rest, I don't think his demise is coming anytime soon. I know some of our fan base feels that, but I think that's still 3, 4, 5 years away. So if they have those 3 horses, I think their depth is going to hurt them a bit, and you're going to see that in the regular season. But I think also don't discredit Tampa here. Some of this rest here from these long extended playoff runs could do them some justice here. So I would like to see them missing in the Atlantic, but I don't have them missing. I have them currently in my top 3 in the Atlantic just because a lot of respect to them. But having Tkachuk there last year, standing up for the team there, going at Kucherov, I think that was a big statement for our team to make. Toronto did our dirty business for us here in the playoffs, but we helped them in the playoffs in the first round too with one of their demons. So it'll be interesting to see what we see from Tampa this year, but I just say never underestimate them.
I don't like hearing that name, but that's okay. Anybody else want to chime in last minute for Tampa? I was going to move on to I forgot there was another team that actually we don't have currently for this division talk tonight. But anybody else want to chime in last real quick about Tampa?
Yeah, I just think that with Tampa and their depth, that has been their go-to line. Like, obviously, the offense has been, running through Stamkos, Kucherov point. But when you needed a jolt, when they needed to turn the tide, it was that fourth line of Belmar, Maroon, and Perry. All of them are gone. And even Killorn, he was that big, power forward type player on the power play, creating havoc in front of the net. Who is going to do that right now? And as you brought up the graphic, Kyle, about all the additions, it doesn't look that all appealing. And yeah, their top six, their core remains intact, but those depth players, it seems like other teams address their depth. Even Toronto addressed their depth and added that character and toughness factor. And it seemed that Tampa subtracted that. But considering how Tampa scouts and adds players, it may bode in their favor because they still do a decent job in trying to replace players. But now is going to be that transitional period of, can that bottom six or fourth line be a major factor this time around as opposed to previous years?
Yeah, I think it's just real quick too before we kind of move on. With the fourth line that they had in Perry, Maroon too, I think Bellemare, I believe, was a part of that fourth line. Gone, boom, 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 see you later, right? So yeah, and I think Joe, you made the comment earlier too about that bottom six, and yeah, they're gonna have to carry a lot of the load that some of the guys have left there for last season. I think that's gonna question a lot of the fans too. Is are they gonna be tough enough on the back end? When the duration of the season gets tough, right? So yeah, I mean, all good points. I don't know if anybody wanted to add in anything last second, but we can move on if that's good with everybody else.
I just want to add one more quick thing. I wonder if other teams have found the playbook on Vasilevsky, because it seemed like Toronto had that during the playoffs with the blocker side, traffic in front. That seemed to play a big factor. I wonder if all the other teams are going to get in front of Vasilevsky and make his life miserable this time around, now that it seems to be a very, constant factor in regards to him letting goals by.
I think that's overstated a bit. I think a lot of it had to do with fatigue, personally.
Fair point.
Small sample size.
That's coming from our rival.
Small sample size, no Cernak. Also, when you look at game 5 and 6, he was exceptional there too. Mm-hmm. So
right, cool. Yeah. Let's move on then if we want. I'll just get rid of this last team here. We don't, and then we'll move on to everybody's team that they want to talk about. But let's bring in Detroit here for a second. These guys, I mean, they obviously made a splash. We saw, and one person that's going to want to talk about it. Sure is Matt, so we'll probably let him start first. But just kind of going over a lot of the moves that they made. I think one of the early ones that we saw was, acquiring. They had Yamamoto, then obviously they didn't have any more. Bringing in Costin, now they bring it all of a sudden. They make the splash for DeBrincat, getting JT Compher over from Colorado, getting Justin Hall from the Leafs. James Reimer over from San Jose too, maybe to compete for the number one job there. Adding in Gostisbehere, you get Lyon, who, I mean, kind of had a resurgence a little bit towards the end of the season there for Florida. And then you see Sprong. And then very recently, that within the past week, they bring in Jeff Petrie from Michael's Montreal Canadiens. So as in terms of the guys that they lost, losing Lindstrom in that trade to Petrie, just a young prospect there. Losing Nedeljkovic, who, really was supposed to kind of take that next step from Carolina and really didn't kind of fit himself into that rotation there. And then, Zadina obviously trying to find his footing. He heads out the door, and then Suter obviously goes to Vancouver, which we saw recently too. So now saying that, Petrie is a part of this team and DeBrincat is a part of this team. And now knowing that the Detroit Red Wings were kind of hovering around the playoff hunt last season too, a little bit, a lot of people are going to wonder, are these moves, adding Compher, DeBrincat, Petrie and all that, is this going to be what it's going to take for these guys to get in? So I want to start with either Michael or Matt talking about either Jeff Petrie or Alex DeBrincat. Obviously, your reactions too on the trades, and how do you think that could benefit or hurt the Red Wings going into this season?
Yeah, I mean, with Alex DeBrincat, I think that he wasn't necessarily a victim of poor performance. There were times where you wanted more for him. He didn't kind of stand out like the player he did in Chicago. Some people attribute that to him not having Kane with him, but I don't think that's really fair. He's quite a good player in his own right. I think it was mostly because as soon as Josh Norris got injured, Ottawa's lines went through a shakeup, and Shane Pinto stayed the second line center for the entirety of the season. And I mean, he had 20 goals as a rookie, but only about 30-ish points. And DeBrincat, having Shane Pinto as the center, I think didn't really help because Shane Pinto was going up against tougher competition. He was more meant to have that full season on the third line and then maybe play top 6 minutes, depending on how that went. And that's not what ended up happening. Batherson was still coming back and recovering fully from his bad injury that he got at the hands of a Buffalo goaltender I will not name. But I think on Detroit, Alex DeBrincat will be penciled in on their top line, which he wasn't on Ottawa because Brady Tkachuk was there. And I think he'll have more opportunity. I think there were times where he just whiffed on open nets, or they were just like almost comically bad luck for him, where he would have like a beautiful chance on goal and all of a sudden you just see a glove of a goalie come out of like nowhere behind a mass of bodies and save his shot, and he would look at the ceiling like, how does that happen? So I think he easily could have had 35 goals this season rather than the 27 he ended up with. So I think for Detroit, it's like you get a goal scorer that they, I think, really needed, especially because a guy like Raymond, who I liked a lot before the 2020 draft, but I think he didn't take a step this past season like some people thought he would. So yeah, there's other holes in the roster, but that I think actually, I disagree with Tony. I think Buffalo actually has a much better chance of making the playoffs than Detroit, but I'll flip it over to Michael to talk about Jeff Petrie there.
Yeah, so Jeff Petrie, I think this is a reasonable acquisition for the Detroit Red Wings. I don't think he was great last season in Pittsburgh. A lot of fans did not like him there. And the season before in Montreal, the COVID year, he wasn't that great either, to be completely honest. So I think he's a lot better of a player than what he's shown the last 2 seasons, but he's still going to have to prove it. I think it's nice to see him get reunited with Ben Sherrod on the blue line. He'll probably come in as the 4th best defenseman on that team. He'll help move the puck a little bit. Maybe he'll get some power play time. But I don't think this is like a world-breaking move. I don't think that Detroit was a Jeff Petrie away from being a playoff team. It certainly helps. He's a useful player. They didn't give up a ton to bring him in. Good on them for having Montreal retain 50% of the salary. But to be honest, it doesn't move the needle too much for me.
Fair. Only 2.3 mil in the cap, though.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not bad.
Kyle, David's trying to get added back in.
Sorry. My bad. Sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
I'm on my phone.
David. Sorry, David. My bad. So yeah, kind of, I can just open up to the floor here too. Just last little take on Detroit before we get on to everybody else's teams. They added Reimer, and I really question, why can't Detroit, and this can be for anybody, are they just having a difficult time trying to find a number one goaltender? And that seemed to be the case for at least the past couple of seasons where, they think it's Nedeljkovic. He didn't really turn out well last year. So who are you going to turn to this year to kind of lock it down in net? Or is it going to be a lot of a splitting between the pipes again this season for Detroit?
It's got to be Husso. You're paying him to do so, right?
True.
I didn't mean to rhyme that one, but
that was good. That was good.
You're paying him pretty handsomely, right? Yeah. I think he's a decent goaltender. Probably a little bit overpaid. I mean, he had exceptional numbers in St. Louis for a pretty short period of time, I would say. So, I mean, you have to lean on Husso, but the defense also has to be better. I mean, you do have now Woolman Sider, I think, could be a really good pairing. A lot of Detroit people loved Jake Woolman, who went to my high school actually for 2 years. I got cut from the junior team when he made it. So, but outside of irrelevant facts, I think their defense. I think that the Red Wings have improved, but is it enough to be contenders? Absolutely not. Is it enough to make the playoffs? No, but they are a better team than before. Right. I didn't like overpaying JT Compher. I think his 52 points this past year was the most fraudulent 52 points I've ever seen. I watched a couple games and I was just like, what does this guy do other than just be a Mikko Rantanen merchant? So
right. Well, I mean, hey, he got his money too at the end of the day, right? So whether or not he's going to be another 52-point player, I don't know if he's really going to care at the end of the day.
Yeah,
so.
He can wipe his tears with his 25 stacks.
Great point by Joe there. I just wanted to jump in on that. Yeah. I've been watching a lot of Colorado film in the offseason here because of the Evan Rodriguez signing that we'll get into later. But Bednar would put JT Compher and a couple head scratchers out there late in games, and Evan Rodriguez would be on the bench. I'm like, kind of like, why is Comfer out there? Why is Lehkonen out there late in games? And I thought the same, Joe. I thought so. As Bednar gets a lot of credit for a lot of things that he does there in Colorado, I didn't agree with the utilization of JT Comfer there. And you've got questions with Detroit on the back end there. Not an analytics darling team. Ben Sherratts of the world. I'm not a big Justin Hall guy. Watch him a lot in Toronto. People say he's a whipping boy. I just don't think he's a capable defenseman. So I don't really know what Detroit's doing there with the defensive situations and signing Andrew Kopp to what they did 2 off seasons ago, which I like, and JT Comfer, who I don't like. A lot of money there for those forwards and wingers that I don't know if that's how you should really build your team, especially in this Atlantic division.
Yeah. No, great points. Okay, so let's move on. I kind of did a disservice there to David, so I apologize for not seeing you there. So why don't we go to you guys as a little bit of a makeup here? So let's jump into the Eastern Conference champion, Florida Panthers. I know it's not Stanley Cup champion. I apologize. But let's jump in here. And to be honest, this probably was the story of the season and the playoffs combined last year, right? The team finished 8th in the Eastern Conference, getting in as the last wildcard spot. Seeing what they did to Boston, sorry. Seeing what they did to Toronto, sorry. Going to Carolina, right, sweeping them, and having this incredible run, right? Like, I think it took a lot of people by surprise. I doubt anybody had them, and they were massive back bracket busters too, And so yeah, I mean, obviously you want to carry that success, and now you feel like you have a foundation to build off because of the success the success that you had this last season, right? So, Kirby, you mentioned there too, and you'll be able to talk more about Evan Rodriguez, bringing in Mikkola, who is part of that defensive crew in New York there. Asplund, bringing in Ekman Larsson, who some people might have forgotten that he's heading to Florida now as well, after he was bought out by Vancouver. They extended Luster. I had to include it. I'm going to butcher his name. Luster Ryan?
Just call him Lusto.
Okay, beautiful.
Perfect.
And then, so yeah, and as key pieces that they didn't really lose, I mean, okay, yes, you lose Gudas, Mark Stahl, and maybe Duclair, but you're going to give some of these younger guys a chance, I think, as well, right? I think Gudas, he got his money. He clearly wanted a lot for what he was able to do in the playoffs this year, and, now he's heading out to Anaheim. So I will leave the floor with David and Kirby, and how you guys think the offseason went, and are we able to continue to build off of that amazing run that we saw in the playoffs last year?
David, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this offseason really being important for Zito last year with that mega trade we did with Calgary between Tkachuk and Huberdeau and Uyghur that opened up money.
Who?
Huberdeau.
I didn't see Huberdeau last year.
Oh, we had our eye on him a lot.
Great.
Down here in Florida, we loved him, but we love Tkachuk now.
That was David's point. That was one of your favorite guys.
Yeah, he actually wished my son.
Yeah, go fuck yourself.
So, yeah, we were going to be really critical on him this offseason, obviously not knowing what was going to happen before. So, Paul Maurice came in last year, a lot of heat from the fans here early on, just how they started. And there was a lot of illnesses and injuries early into that season that put a lot of pressure on the team. And I would say around January, Kirby, correct me if I'm wrong, but they had like a behind-the-door meeting, in the locker room orchestrated by Tkachuk and Ekblad and Barkov just to kind of, listen, guys, you got to right the ship after this all-star break, which they kind of did. And like you said, if it wasn't for some help at the end from, Chicago beating Pittsburgh or something like that in the last few games, this Cinderella story never even would have happened. So, but talking about this season, a lot of players that they did bring back. I think they're one of the few teams, if the only team, that bring back the top 10 scorers from last year are all returning. We know that Brandon Montour and Ekblad are going to be a bit injured at the beginning of the year. So, a lot of that was done in the offseason was beefing up that defense. Like you said, Ekman Larsson. We added Mike Riley, Dmitry Kulikov, Mikula. I'm probably forgetting one more, but a lot of defensive in depth that we didn't have last year. So, Kirby, I know you're going to mention some names like Gustav Forsling that's going to have to really step up early on. So, really, really eager to see how the Panthers start because, like you said, last season in one win or 1 point away from not even having a playoff berth to having a Stanley Cup playoff or Stanley Cup final appearance. So a lot of pressure early on for this Panthers team.
And just before you start, Kirby, too, I don't know what the injuries were like after the run. What's that going to play into at the start of the season?
Yeah, we still probably have to hear reports on Luosterainen's injury, coming back from the broken foot in the Eastern Conference Final. Obviously, Kachuk's broken sternum. So there was a lot of injuries there. Sam Bennett was seen with a walking boot on his foot at some of the weddings. A lot of Panthers got married over the offseason here. So we've seen Montour in the sling and Ekblad and Bennett with the boot and stuff like that. So, and Ekblad, he had 3 injuries. So he had the shoulder, broken foot. What was the other one, David?
For who? I'm sorry.
For Ekblad, he had 3 injuries.
Yeah, broken foot and a couple of separated shoulders. No big deal.
Yeah, so a lot of injuries coming into this season, and that's why I think the Panthers could start a little slow. But just going back to David's point there, if it wasn't for Alex Lyon, who's now in Detroit, the Panthers wouldn't have this to talk about either. So it was really interesting to see how Bobrovsky took over at a certain point in the playoffs. Lyon got us there. And what happens with Spencer Knight coming back from the player assistance program? I think they're going to start him a little slow. He could start in the A with Charlotte. So the goaltending situation, if the Panthers can figure that out, I think they're top or near top of the division. If it kind of plays out like last year, where it was a struggle there for quite a while until Alex Lyon kind of saved the season for the Panthers, then it'll be very interesting for the Panthers. But I do like the new additions. I'm big on Mikkola, big on Evan Rodriguez. I think Evan Rodriguez will help not only on the power play, which we need as that trigger man, a guy that can finish. I know he's not a good shooting percentage guy, but I think playing with guys like Barkov and Kachuk and Reinhart, really smart, cerebral players, I think Evan Rodriguez will fit really good in the Florida system. And Mikkola is going to replace Gudas and Stahl kind of combined. He's not going to have those bone-jarring hits that Gudas comes with, but he's going to make smarter reads than Gudas does. And Mark Stahl, a lot of work on the PK and shot blocking, but at his age, not really a mobile defenseman. So I think Mikkola playing with, the Adam Fox and with Crosby and McKinnon, I think these guys will fit in really nice with a very skilled Panthers team.
Good.
Evan Rodriguez to me is like one of the most underrated guys in the NHL. He can play both ends of the ice at 5-on-5. He's defensively sound. Offensively, he can slot in anywhere. I'm actually shocked that after his time in Pittsburgh that nobody jumped at signing him, and then he went to Colorado for cheap. So finally a team recognizes that, here's a depth player who can really slot in anywhere in your middle six and provide. So obviously being that he signed in the Atlantic Division, I was like, oh, of course. But happy for him that he's finally getting recognized with a 4-year contract. So I think that was a pretty savvy signing by Florida. Yeah,
really good signing. I do want to move on. I know we're kind of nearing an hour mark here, so I want to give everybody a chance to kind of talk about their team, and I hope that's okay with you guys. So why don't we talk about the team that Florida knocked out in the first round there, Drew? If you want to talk about them, we can. Let's bring up the graphic, though. Let's talk about the Boston Bruins, because probably, again, another one of the bigger storylines, too, this offseason was the Patrice Bergeron retirement, right? I think a lot of people, you can kind of argue that maybe some people saw it coming, maybe some people didn't, but obviously a big loss. And, they got to rename that Selke Trophy after him now. It's just, it feels right, I think. That's just my opinion. But just kind of looking at the graphic here, it's astonishing to me that you see the record there. You see them finishing first. Okay, they lose in the first round, and then you go right underneath it, and it's just a complete overhaul, right? Bringing in Lucic from Calgary, bringing in Shattenkirk from the Ducks. You got Morgan Geekie now from Seattle. Van Riemsdyk all of a sudden. Boquist coming in from Columbus. Patrick Brown to add a little bit to the bottom six, and Magna as well. And then, like I mentioned, they're losing Bergeron, losing Taylor Hall and Nick Foligno in the trade over to Chicago. Bertuzzi goes to Peter and Joe's Toronto team. Orlov getting out the door because he wanted $7 million. Hathaway, who's a big part of that team. And then again, Krejci kind of retiring as well too, right? So a lot of changes because it was frankly a crazy season if you include the offseason for Boston, right? So Drew, I'll kind of give the floor to you. And, you see all these moves, you see everything that kind of happened this offseason. How do you feel now that the season's kind of getting closer and all of a sudden these news start to break that you see the retirements, you see these additions and subtractions? Where do you sit on all this?
Yeah, so first of all, welcome to my therapy session, because we have not fully unpacked all of this yet on Brews and Bruins. We got as far as the Bergeron retirement, and then we haven't really talked too much about the additions and about Krejci, especially, but that graphic, just as I read that, just got worse and worse and worse as we went down.
Sorry.
It's it looks good. It looks like it's well designed. It's just the content wasn't great. As a Bruins fan, Bergeron retiring. I was 6 or 7 years old when he was drafted by the Bruins. He was that guy that me and so many people in my generation grew up with, as he is the guy, and he wasn't even the captain for the vast majority of his career, but he was still the staple guy there. And just like beyond his play on the ice, just a huge, like, in terms of the culture of that team and of that organization, and losing that, I mean, the future still looks bright and we still have a core there, but it's just, you lose that huge piece of the culture there and that real core. He was the core. The Bruins built this team around him when they moved on from Joe Thornton. So it's really the end of an era, and then Krejci going with him. It just really marks that, you know, Chara, Krejci, and Bergeron were those staple guys for so many years that were with the 2011 Cup team, that were there before and struggled, that they were there after and struggled. So, but then you have this outlook with this core of Brad Marchand, you got David Pastrnak, you got Charlie McAvoy. Just those three guys alone is a threat. It is something to build around. First line center is a huge question mark for them right now. I mean,
I know a guy.
I know a guy. You got Charlie Coyle and you got Pavel Zacha there that you can figure something out there. But I think the Bruins for a while, especially at center, have had like too much depth, and they've wound up having to trade younger players that weren't quite there yet because there just wasn't space on the team, and they could get another asset, a winger, a defenseman, whatever they need. And now they're suddenly in this position where you don't have Bergeron, you don't have Krejci, who are your top two guys for so long. It's almost like they weren't fully prepared for it, even though we all knew it was coming. So they're in a position where I think they're still going to be a playoff team like they usually are. But, I mean, they could wind up being wild card or something if you have an injury. They're much more fragile than they were, especially last season, where everything came together in line. Everyone played their A game. Yeah. If you have someone that's off, if you have an injury, Pasta goes down, and you're missing 40 goals right there, who's going to step up this year? You don't really know yet.
Who's going to fill the shoes, right?
Yeah.
Anybody else want to just quickly chime in on expectations, what we think for Boston coming up this season?
Yeah, I love their off season. Oh, that's it.
I loved it.
Bye, Bergeron. Bye, Krejci.
You got Milan Lucic now, though, so he's going to fight a lot. It's going to be good.
Yeah,
it's going to be fun if you're there. Have a few beers, watch a brawl back to
Lucic and Ryan Reeves. Are you kidding me?
No,
lead the league in penalty minutes, and that's all that matters. We're done with the
no
points.
resentment from Joe at all.
I was just about to say, President's Trophy curse. It's alive and well at this point.
It's so real.
The one comment I was going to make on Boston is I think it'll have to kind of be like a team effort like Seattle has, where sure they have some players like Beniers and McCann, who I guess you could consider like star or becoming stars in the league, but I would say that it would have to be like a team effort for them to really make a push at the playoffs this year. I know a lot of people always throw at me, Boston deserves the benefit of the doubt, and for me, it's like usually I'm totally there. And last season, I wasn't counting them out, but I was like, I'm not sure, and they proved me wrong. And they had an amazing season, regular season anyway. This season, I truly am outside of a handful of players. I'm really struggling to see how the team makes playoffs, but I'm sure they'll somehow prove me wrong again. So,
they shocked everyone last year, right? So.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Let's move on. Michael, you ready?
Oh yeah, let's go.
Okay, let's do this. All right, let's talk about Montreal here. So I mean, it's gonna be a bit of an uphill climb. Let's be honest. I think it's gonna be tough. It's a tough Atlantic Division this year. But let's bring up the graphic here and see their beautiful record from last year of 31, 45, and 6. Didn't go well, but I mean, hey, you bring in David Reinbacher now from the draft. Trying to man up that defensive core a little bit. You did have Petrie. And then you lost Petrie. I had to throw that in there in case you see that. But the biggest addition, I think, for you guys, you can argue that it was Alex Newhook, right? So bringing him over from Colorado, you can talk a little bit about, how he's going to fit more into a role with this team. You get another year again with Suzuki and now Caulfield, who had the extension as well. Bringing in Anderson, Casey DeSmith now as a backup too. So, now maybe he can try to find a little bit of light and see, hey, maybe I have a real opportunity to be a number one goaltender here. And then acquiring Lindstrom from that Detroit trade recently with Jeff Petrie. Losing out on Joel Edmondson, Drouin goes away too, along with Gurianov, Hoffman, and Tierney as well. So with that, I know it doesn't look like a great graphic because of the record and everything there, but every team's got to have some hope and optimism, and I want to give the floor to you, Michael, for that. So your assessment on the offseason that was for Montreal, the draft that was for Montreal as well, too, acquiring Reinbacher at the number 5 overall pick, and just what your hopes are and expectations are this season for Montreal.
Well, it's funny to say that here on October the 17th, I don't think there's a lot of clarity as to what the lineup is going to be in Montreal, especially goaltending and defense. Right now, they have 4 goaltenders on NHL contracts. So you had Allen, you had Montembeault, you have Primo, and now you've added Casey DeSmith to this conversation. I don't know which direction they're going to go with this. So if anyone in the Atlantic Division is interested in a backup goaltender, we have some options for you. You might even get them on waivers. I don't know. But and then again, on defense right now, you have like 8 defensemen that I think could fit into the NHL. So I still think Montreal has quite a few moves that they need to make. I like the addition of Alex Newhook. It was a steep price for what Alex Newhook has done in the NHL so far.
Sure.
Certainly good enough to be on the Colorado Avalanche as like a third-line player. For the price he gave up, he's going to have to be a top 6 at some point, and I don't know that he will be right away. I think that he's a player that kind of disappointed a little bit in Colorado, to be honest. He was a first-round pick. He's not quite lived up to that expectation. But then again, we've seen what the Montreal Canadiens have done with Kirby Dach, going with another first-round draft pick that had high hopes. Didn't live up to it in Chicago. He came into Montreal, and he really found a role. So that's certainly a big question there. And then you look at what they did at the drafts, going with Reinbacher at 5th overall, which I think was quite controversial. Look, they had, I think, 3 pretty good draft picks. They had the 5th overall. They had a late first. They had a pretty early second. To walk away from this draft with the amount of forward talent that they had at the top and say, okay, we got Reinbacher and Alex Newhook, I think that's pretty disappointing, if I'm being honest. I think a lot of fans should be quite disappointed. And quite frankly, I think Montreal is a team that's maybe rushing the rebuild a little bit, going out and bringing in an Alex Newhook instead of being patient with maybe some of the prospects they currently have in-house. It was not too long after the draft where one of Kent Hughes or Jeff Gordon said that they believed that the 2 players closest to being NHL ready were Connor Bedard and David Reinbacher. So I'm wondering if maybe they drafted based on who's going to be the closest to NHL ready. And that being said, I don't think there's a guarantee that we see Reinbacher in the NHL this season. I think there's a pretty good chance that he goes back to Switzerland. So we heard from his coach too in Switzerland that either he's going to be an NHLer or he's going to have to go back to Europe. So no chance of him playing in Laval.
Really quick question on Slavkovsky, number 1 pick last year. Do you see a development with him going into this season?
I hope so. He certainly had plenty of time. His season ended pretty early last year with the shoulder injury. I think he spent a lot of the offseason working out and whatnot. With Slavkovsky, I think it's going to have to come down to confidence, and it's going to have to being able to compute the NHL game at the speed that it is. I think he was a little bit slow and lacked some IQ. So it's going to be wait and see. He'll certainly be given a ton of opportunities, though.
Does anybody in the group here think that Montreal could surprise people, just in general?
No.
All right.
My prospect pool, I think it's top 3, top 5, but outside of that.
Okay.
Yeah, they have good prospects. My partner's a Habs fan, and she's all in the Montez Beast hype wagon. I think he was solid for them last year. I just don't think that they're ready. I think it's just kind of a development year for them. So, and maybe seeing if they have something like a gem in Newhook or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. Right. You're looking for little steps forward. I don't think you're looking at the playoffs quite yet.
I'm curious to see how Newhook would also fare on the wing too, because he could also play on that side. I know center may be a little bit out of reach because of Suzuki and Doc, but if he's able to provide that speed just like Caulfield can on the wing, I think that may boost his confidence a little bit more, give him a little bit more of an opportunity, as you mentioned about the top 6. But yeah, I think it's going to be another year of probably a top 5 lottery pick at this point.
We'll see what happens, right? Okay, all right, good stuff.
I just have to say, as the Bruins guy here, I hope the Habs go 0-82. I hope they don't score a goal all season. No, but actually, I
lose
also
the lottery. Lose the lottery. That's the most important part. I don't want Matt
a lot.
I miss the playoff series. Like I do. They need that again. We're getting bored of beating Toronto in Game 7s. Like, come on, let's get some Habs. Let's get some Habs action now. Let's go.
If I can rebuttal, I'll say in advance, you're welcome for not being last in the Atlantic.
I'm gonna play for a little bit.
It's getting chippy right now.
Good. I want the chippiness. Let's go, boys. All right. Let's move on because the chippiness will probably continue, and I love it. Matt, you ready?
Ooh. Ottawa gets first dibs on the Battle of Ontario. I respect that. Okay, let's go.
It was the first slide that I saw. So I mean, sure. Let's talk about Ottawa. Let's talk about Ottawa though. 39, 35, and 8. Made a little bit of a push towards the end of the year when it came to playoff hunt. Obviously, it didn't really work out. They finished 11th overall in the Eastern Conference. Ended up missing the playoffs. The losses we mentioned earlier were about Alex DeBrincat. Losing. I can't remember Talbot. Anyway, Cam Talbot, gone to LA. Julien Gauthier, Gambrell, and then Brown as well too. He is out. But one of the recent big additions that you guys had coming alongside with Kubliak from the DeBrincat trade, the biggest one was Tarasenko. He signs the 1-year deal with you guys, and also too as well. Another big one that you had early on in the offseason was the number 1 goaltender now in Jonas Korpisalo, and then you can see Sabranko also came in as well with the DeBrincat trade too. So. Probably one of the teams in the NHL that everyone's going to look at alongside maybe Buffalo, if you want to argue too, about is this the year? Because at some point you're going to be on the clock, right? Like you have to make a move at some point. So is there pressure for Ottawa going into the season thinking, hey, we have to do something now or else we're in a world of trouble? So not Ottawa's expectations going into the season.
Yeah, and I think it actually all starts at the top. After Eugene Melnick's passing last year, since November, there was a long sale process. Finally, Michael Andlauer is selling his share of the Montreal Canadiens. He's going to take over ownership of the Ottawa Senators. So starting at the top, he said he wants to invest more in hockey ops, which Ottawa desperately needs because they're not a huge market. They can't pull in the big name guys like teams, like Toronto or Tampa now with the reputation that those teams have, New York Rangers. Ottawa doesn't have that pull, so they need to invest more in amateur scouting and make sure that they're able to build out from the draft because that's primarily what they've done, and that's how they're going to continue to build the team in the future. I think they've been a bit lucky with Claude Giroux having kind of that hometown angle to it, and obviously that attracted him to the Sens, and Ottawa trading for DeBrincat early last summer helped him be motivated to sign. So I think the Sens realized, Claude Giroux still has it. He actually had the highest goal total of his career last season, playing alongside Brady Tkachuk and Tim Stützle, who also both had career years. Stützle was 1 goal shy of 40. Brady Tkachuk over point per game, and some people were questioning his offensive ceiling, so it was nice to see him pop over 80 points. Vladimir Tarasenko was interesting. I'll admit, we joked about it when his agent when he fired his agent, and it was Carolina, and then people brought up Ottawa, and we're just oh, he's got Sen in his name. It makes sense. And, Tarasenko, and anyway. And then when he actually signed, everyone's holy crap, this isn't a joke. And I made the joke that this was EA NHL for Pierre Dorion because, he loses Alex DeBrincat through trade, which was kind of, forced because DeBrincat didn't want to sign long-term. And then he's all right, I lost top 6 forward, I'll go into free agency. Who's there? Tarasenko. With Korpisalo, they lose Cam Talbot, who really didn't perform well. And they're all right, let's go into free agency. Top goalie, go. And, we had Aaron Portzline on our show, and he's covered Columbus for his entire career, basically. And he was saying quite good things about Korpisalo, and that after he got his hip surgery, that he played much better. So I think Korpisalo coming into Ottawa, having a friendship actually with Anton Forsberg. They won a championship in Cleveland together with the Monsters. So they've been a tandem before, so I think that helps there too. The blue line, Hamonic is not going to be playing top 4 minutes. Jake Sanderson showed he is a very capable NHL defenseman. Full year of Chikrin, hopefully a full year of Norris. Holden's out. Zaitsev is not going to play on the Ottawa Senators anymore. Thank you, Chicago. So there's a lot of moves that they made to fix their depth. They do lose some of that, I guess, warrior status by letting Austin Watson go to free agency, but they just didn't have the money for him. They still need to make a move to get Shane Pinto to sign on this team because he's an RFA waiting for a contract. So they still need to make a little bit of wiggle room, but I think their depth's in a much better place than it was last year. And I think there is going to be a lot of pressure on them to make the playoffs because they have really put all their chips in. Pierre Dorian's job is on the line. He has not made the playoffs in his tenure as GM since the 2017 run. And DJ Smith has yet to show that he can win in November. So Ottawa really needs to come out of the gate flying. Otherwise, a lot of heads are going to roll, I think.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to mention, too, I don't know where Drew went, maybe technical difficulties, but in case it was great having him on if for some reason doesn't come back. I want to know what the Battle of Ontario boys feel about the Ottawa Senators going into this season.
Yeah, it all depends on how well Tarasenko is going to be. I think that it was a great signing, but there's still a lot of question marks. Are you going to get the 82 point forward that we saw last season, or are we going to get, the inconsistency and a little bit injury results or injuries that we saw this season because he didn't quite have the impact when they traded him to the New York Rangers. Kind of didn't look that great in the playoffs as well. And the same thing with Korpisalo too. Like I do understand that, they need an extra goalie. He has shown glimpses of brilliance, but even in the playoffs with the LA Kings last season, didn't quite obviously the Kings were kind of a bit of an underdog in the playoffs, but they wanted a little bit more from him. He didn't quite have the result as well. So those are going to be the two key factors as well. And also the addition of Jacob Chikrin. I think if he's healthy, similar to Chikrin, Tarasenko, if he's going to be healthy, I think this is going to be a big part of their blue line because he's got the mobility, the two-way play, the booming shot from the point, adds to that defense. But I think it's just a little bit, wary on the injury side of things because when, he was probably being linked to Toronto as well, or when they were in the sweepstakes as well, that was one thing that was my concern was the injuries. So see what's going to happen, but they did make the necessary moves. It's just a matter of getting the results at this point.
Yeah, it's funny. I like the one game that I remember from last year that was so vividly was that brutal. I know it was a beatdown, but it was still a brutal fight like that. Like everything that broke out with Florida. I don't know if you guys remember Florida and Ottawa, right? Like it was a crazy fight that happened there. But I don't know why it kind of just popped in my head. But man, like you're gonna see like maybe a more physical Ottawa team too going into this season. But no, good stuff.
I just wanted to add on Ottawa there. I think I'm very high on their goaltending, their tandem goaltending of Forsberg and Korpisalo especially. He's my breakthrough goalie this year. Last year, Hellebuyck kind of rebounding into form, which he did. So I'm really high on Korpisalo having a huge year this year. I think their defense needs to stay healthy, namely Jacob Chikrin. But if they have health on their side, I think they're top 3 combined goaltending and defense in the division. I think the problem that Ottawa runs into is the same problem that Buffalo and Montreal run into. I don't know their fours. They're defensively sound enough. So I think Ottawa needs to make a big leap there, and they need to keep seeing progressions like they did last year from Sanderson, and I'll add Brandstrom as well.
Okay. And last quick question, Matt. I know Dylan mentioned it in the comments there, but thoughts really quick on the Korpisalo contract this offseason.
Yeah, I think they kind of did the reverse of what they did with Matt Murray, where they backloaded Matt Murray's contract when they traded and then signed for him. He, in this last year with Toronto, I know he's going to be on LTIR, but he's making like $8 million in real salary. So that's nuts. But what they did with Korpisalo is they front-loaded the contract so that if he does need to be bought out, it's not going to count as much against the cap for the Sens. It'll be an easier contract if they need to retain, move it, or what have you. That said, I have promised the good people of Ottawa that I will go out and buy a Jonas Korpisalo jersey because the last time I bought a goaltending jersey after a trade, it was the one and only Craig Anderson, and that worked out well. So I gotta hope that the jersey voodoo works.
You gotta go all out for that one, right? Yeah. Beautiful. All right, last one. Ready, boys? Let's talk about them. Everybody's favorite team. It's the Toronto Maple Leafs. Of course. So
Best and most important team in the league. Don't forget.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
Couldn't agree more as well. Toronto ended up finishing 50, 21, and 11 last year, fourth in the East. They were second place in the Atlantic Division. They did it, though. They got over the hump, as everybody so badly wanted them to get over the hump, and they unfortunately ended up losing to Kirby and David's Florida Panthers in the second round. And as you see below, with the Boston Bruins, as we kind of saw in the offseason, they made a lot of moves too. So adding in Tyler Bertuzzi, bringing over John Klingberg, Ryan Reeves adding a bit more grit to the bottom six, Max Domi all of a sudden coming in with Gambrell, and very recently now having Martin Jones, who could be the number 2, might be the number 3. Who knows? Maybe he goes up to number 1 and does something stellar, because there's a goalie circus, if you want to call it, there too as well. But with the additions did come the losses too. So weren't able to get Ryan O'Reilly back, losing Hall over to Detroit, Luke Shen losing him too, Kerfoot out to Arizona, Achari Gustafson, and Michael Bunting too, who did have a very good tenure throughout the Leafs, throughout his Leafs career there, is out the door as well. So my question for Peter and Joe, I'll start with Peter because I think we gave Joe Tampa, but we'll get Joe in afterwards.
Talk too much.
Okay.
Tell me to shut the fuck up.
Yeah, let's quickly start with Peter, though. Hey, it's great. You made it over the hump. Obviously, expectations were probably as high as ever when they made it to the second round. Didn't go their way, unfortunately. Now you look at this next year, and, all of a sudden there was talks, too, about the Matthews and the Nylander contract. Nothing's been official yet. But just based on everything that we've seen in the last 3 months, what have your thoughts been this offseason? What are you hoping to see in your expectations for the Leafs this season?
Change of mentality and character. I think that was the biggest thing that Trey Living said. When he went out and signed Reeves, Domi, and Bertuzzi, he wanted to add that, those characteristics of snot, piss, and grit, all those things that made this team a little bit more difficult to play against, kind of like the Florida Panthers, kind of like the Boston Bruins. And Bertuzzi, Domi, and Reeves brings that, Bertuzzi with the skill to play alongside top-tier players, mixing it with play in extracurricular activities, if you want to call it, after the whistle, post-whistle scrums. Domi being energetic kind of fills a void with Kerfoot, although he's not going to have that versatility in terms of being on penalty kill. But even Ryan Reeves, just bringing in that character, that mentality to try and get these guys out of their shells, because it kind of seems like, not that there's a locker room issue, but it kind of seemed like people were afraid of being themselves. So he wants to try and break them out of that character. And Reeves has done that consistently throughout his career. So if he's able to do that and change the characteristic and the mindset of this team and kind of have that shift in, winning, creating that winning mentality, kind of like what the Florida Panthers did, bringing in Matthew Tkachuk, because that seemed to help them out big time. I think that's what the Maple Leafs needed. And I think that with these acquisitions, those 3 main ones are going to be very key. You could also look at John Klingberg being a key one to try and alleviate the offensive pressure from Morgan Rielly as well. Having another mobile puck moving defenseman from the back end. Defensively, still not great, but we've heard Ryan Reeves try to say that he's trying to improve defensively or try to prioritize defense every now and then as well. So that's a good sign, but all in all, I think this is a change in direction for the Maple Leafs, and Brad Treliving did a really good job bringing in finally a top 6 winger in Tyler Bertuzzi, who could play alongside Matthews and Marner. Similar to Bunting fell out of favor. Max Domi can move up and down the lineup, and I think the big one is going to be Matthew Nice as well, because you have a solid left wing 1-2-3 on that side, which has been kind of weak for a few years now.
Okay. Joe, all you.
Yep, no more Alex Kerfoot, second line in the playoffs. I'm pretty happy to see that. Happy to see he made some money in Arizona, but happy to see he's not going to be playing second line for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Again, as Peter said, that Tyler Bertuzzi addition, I'm a big fan, just as long as he can stay healthy. Health last year was a big issue, but this is probably the smartest player that Matthews and Marner have ever kind of gotten to play with them, if he does play with them. We don't know yet. Like, I just think the vision on him and just how he uses his body to get the puck and how he uses his body to protect the puck and how good of a playmaker he is exceptional. And on top of that, he's a great playmaker. He can also chip in 20 goals here and there. So I'm really excited to watch Tyler Bertuzzi in the blue and white. John Klingberg is an exceptional skater. So good that he was actually playing left. He's a right-handed defenseman. He was playing on the left side from what I saw from Minnesota last year because they had so many right-handed defensemen and did a decent job. he is just extremely scary with the puck in his own end. I do have one question, Peter. Where do you think Max Domi fits in the lineup? To me, he's a little awkward.
Yeah, that's the main thing. He's going to be that guy that can move up every now and then if there's an injury situation. Because I at the moment, I think Tyler Bertuzzi is the penciled in top line left wing. Matthew Nyes, I think, is going to be on that second spot. And I think having that energy and speed that Domi brings, I think it could benefit the third line as well, depending on if David Kampf is going to be in that spot as well, because he could rotate up and down. Pontus Holberg is a guy that could come up. Maybe he can try and be a third liner. I don't know if he's going to overtake Kampf, but I do think that Domi for sure is going to be in that, middle six range, but most likely on that third line.
Yeah. I have one question. That's it.
Yeah, okay.
After everything that we saw in the offseason with the additions and the subtractions, right? And I'm going to leave this to everyone here. Is this team better than they were last season overall? Is this team a better team on paper? Because we haven't seen them on ice. On paper, is this team better? And I'll leave it to everyone if they have their own thoughts on that.
I would say on paper, yes. I mean, you look at the kind of impact that Alex Kerfoot had, like as Joe mentioned, you're not going to see him in the top six anymore because he was rarely invisible or rarely impacted play in that role. Again, you got those high energy guys that could go in and establish the forecheck, establish the attack, and that was something that was lacking because it seemed like players were afraid to do that. I think you're going to be a little bit more competitive with this Maple Leafs team up front, and obviously on the back end or even up front as well. I do hate losing Luke Shen and Noel Acciari. I love them. I love the acquisitions. I think those are going to be the two big ones. Ryan O'Reilly, I could take or leave, but those two I think are going to be felt big time because they can lay the body, they can be physical, and now you're just relying only on Ryan Reeves at that point, but also maybe if you could get a little bit more physicality from Bertuzzi and Domi, I think that may still help them in that regard. But overall, I still think it's a good offseason.
Okay. I thought Kyle's question was going to be, what are the Leafs going to do with the cap situation? Does that mean Brody and Yarncroke aren't going to be there? Because that adds
great question.
Yeah. In regards to the cap, you can't trade or get rid of Brody. I think he's too important at this point. If you do move Yarncroke, I can see that, but I still think that he could bounce back after quiet playoffs because he was really effective in the regular season. I think if you do move one of those two guys, it is going to be Yarncroke, but Brody I still think is going to be very impactful because he looked really good at times with Jake McCabe as that shutdown kind of tandem.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say my worry is if they put Morgan Riley and John Klingberg together, that is going to be like a defensive black hole. No.
Okay.
It's either opposite-handedness, and that would be a big worry of mine if they were somehow matched up together at some point this season. So,
gotcha.
I think Max Domi is going to be a fan favorite, obviously.
Agreed.
Based on his dad, and he's a guy who, he won't bring a lot of defense, but he's offensively, he has some talent there, and of course, energy guy. I think that it's kind of fun that he's back in Toronto, even though, Sens fans don't have a lot of love for Domi. I think it was going to happen. He was going to make his way to Toronto, so it kind of feels right that he's there. And I'm kind of hoping that the Battle of Ontario, especially with Reeves being added by Toronto and Ottawa signing Zach McEwen, who I can only assume they signed for 3 years, that they're like, you have Reeves for 3, well, we have McEwen for 3. So I don't know. They're just going to throw hands a lot and hopefully keep Brady Tkachuk out of the box because I know Brady likes to throw down as well. So
and Michael, real quick too, you guys have the first game of the season against the Leafs. So any quick thoughts on that?
I'm thinking Xhekaj versus Reeves is going to be the first fight that happens.
Yes. I would love to see that. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
We know the Leafs always have trouble with their first game of the season, whether it's against Ottawa or Montreal.
Very true.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
So I think that's a Montreal win.
Correct. David, any thoughts real quick on the Leafs?
Yeah, I mean, we know the Panthers and we want Florida. I think
I didn't even see that shirt. That's amazing. I didn't even see that until you showed it there.
I think with Gudas gone, it makes Toronto a little happy, snubbing them. I think there were some rumors that he wanted to go to Toronto, or they're trying to get him and, denying them. So, no, yeah, I'm high on Toronto for sure. I think goaltending might be an issue with Samsonov as the number one. Florida's taken him out twice, so I'm not too worried about him. But yeah, I would say goaltending to me is probably the most sus thing for me going into Toronto. But other than that, I think they're pretty good.
Cool. Well, the last thing I wanted to end it with is I have predictions for this entire division, and I just wanted initial thoughts of what we think too is going to happen. So these were my quick thoughts. I believe Toronto is the best team in this division. I think they'll get it done when it comes to that this season. I like them at number 1. I like Boston at number 2. I don't think they fall off that much, even though with the losses of Bergeron and that, I could explain everything with every team, but I'm just going to quickly go through it. I got Buffalo at number 3. I think they're going to make a really good jump this year. I have Ottawa at 4. I have Florida at 5. I got Tampa at 6. I think it's going to be that bad of a year for Tampa this year. Having Ottawa and Florida at 4 and 5, though, I actually have both of them making the playoffs. I think they're the 2 teams that are going to get the wild card spots in. Actually, I was going to flip Florida and Ottawa. Sorry, Matt. I actually have Florida above Ottawa, and then I have Detroit and Montreal. Sorry, Michael. But just real quick, overall, where we think your teams are going to fall at the end of the season when it's all said and done. Where do we think we're going to fall? Michael, I'll start with you and go across. Where do we think Montreal is going to go?
Montreal's very obviously the only rebuilding team in this division, so they're going to be right at the bottom. I think that's acceptable.
All right. Peter and Joe, I'll include you too. Do you believe the Leafs can, and with my predictions, that they can finish number 1?
I want to say first, but people are going to call me a big homer for that. So I'm not going to say first, but I do believe that they can take one of the top 2 spots. I think they're going to be a top 2 team again this time around. They can be a first place team. Again, on paper, they can. But the homer side of me wants to say yes, but you know what? I'm just going to play it safe and say second.
Okay. And then Abby just mentioned here real quick too, just how you guys, again, were feeling about the goaltending situation. Is that going to be a concern maybe in towards the end of the year? You think it's good, Joe?
I think it's fine. Just injury, maybe injury issues with Samsonov we saw last year. He was on and off, but I mean, 919, little bit inconsistent, gets swimming a lot, but I was happy with the development of Joseph Woll as well. Like, he came into the season so hot, was exceptional in the AHL, got called up, played very well in the NHL. I wonder his ability to track pucks through traffic. I know he had a little bit of trouble I saw from last year with that, but a lot more of a calmer goaltender than Samsonov is. He came in at the absolute worst time in the playoffs, and he played pretty darn well for that, right? Yeah. So I'm fine with the goaltending situation.
Okay, and then just real quick with David and Kirby there. Yeah, I do have Florida at 5, but honestly, I could even see them going to number 2. Like, I think specifically with this division, it's going to be all over the place, right? It could go anywhere, and I really do feel about that. It could really go anywhere. So, agree, disagree with Florida, maybe 5, 4, somewhere around there, or do you think they're going to contend for the top 3?
Kyle, I have 5 teams coming out of the Atlantic like you, so I like that. But a lot of teams jumbled there differently than me. I do have Toronto at the top, and then the 2 Florida teams. I could see one of them slipping with regression with the Panthers due to injuries, maybe with Tampa's lack of depth. But I have Ottawa and Buffalo in there as well. I think your hot take is having Boston that high with not addressing the center position, because the Atlantic divisions are beasts down the middle of the ice. We haven't even mentioned Barkov's name tonight, so. Like, it's going to be a challenge for Boston to finish that high. If they finish that high, they should be ecstatic. Yeah, but I see Florida around 2nd, 3rd. But with the injuries to Montour and Ekblad early, I wouldn't be surprised if it was wild card area if one of Ottawa or Buffalo jump up, which I'm high on both of them.
Yeah, I didn't think about that Boston number 1 center, so you have a good point there. Matt, real quick too, is Ottawa going to really contend for this top 3 wild card position too in the Atlantic as well?
I mean, I'd like to say yes on paper, sure. If you just look at the roster on paper, I think, yeah, you could say they have a chance at top 3. I think the problem with Ottawa is that they haven't proven that yet. So with them, like, while Boston earns the benefit of the doubt, and it's hard to say that they will miss the playoffs. For Ottawa, it's like hard to say that they will make the playoffs because there's been a lot of progression in guys like Tkachuk and Stützle, but like others have mentioned, they need to stay healthy, and they just need to get average goaltending this season. Last season, they rotate through like 7 goalies, and it was a mess, a lot of injuries. So, yeah, I would like to see them compete for a 3rd in the division behind like Toronto and maybe Tampa or Florida or something like that. But I could see them and Buffalo being neck and neck for either the top wild card spot or maybe that 2nd wild card spot.
Cool. All right, I'm done with all you guys. Thank you all, though, for appreciate you guys coming on. I know Drew kind of left, maybe he had technical issues, but I'm gonna make a big post afterwards too, including all your podcasts as well too, to make sure you guys get a chance to go listen to them. If you guys get a chance to, for who's still tuning in, check out tomorrow night. We're gonna do the Metro Division tomorrow night, and next week we have the Central and the Pacific Division. But guys, I appreciate you all coming on tonight. Thank you for the talks. Thank you for the good takes and all that. And we hope to see you guys for the beginning of the season, which is very soon. And we hope you guys too do some live watch-alongs as well. They're fun to do. Have some beers, get drunk. I don't care. Shit talking community if you want. It's a lot of fun. And I really appreciate you guys coming on. And thank you guys for tuning in. And we'll catch you guys tomorrow night. But we will see you next time. So thanks, guys, and we'll see you later.
Thanks, Kyle.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thanks.